On July 21, 1943, Forest Ranger Wang Zhan came across a tree he did not recognize during a routine inspection in a valley near the border between Sichuan and Hubei, a deciduous conifer with reddish bark and a trunk more than a meter across. He cut some branches and collected cones. When botanists examined the samples, they could not believe it. This was Metasequoia, a genus of tree declared extinct 5 million years earlier. A tree that had grown alongside dinosaurs and vanished from the record 5 million years ago was standing next to a village shrine. Locals had known it their whole lives. What happened next changed how scientists understood species survival and raised a question botanists still cannot close. Metasequoia once dominated much of the northern hemisphere. It grew above the Arctic Circle. Its fossils, leaves, branches, cones turn up on islands in the Canadian Arctic, in Svalbard, in Greenland. Samples from these 50-million-year-old Arctic deposits look like a pile of fallen leaves from someone's yard, dark brown, brittle, soft, perfectly preserved under a layer of glacier. Back then, Metasequoia shed its leaves before 4 months of polar darkness set in, and the leaf litter settled into the soil over decades, forming layers meters thick. Metasequoia wasn't rare then. It was the backdrop, the dominant tree of an entire climate zone stretching from present-day Canada to Asia. Paleobotanists find its remains in the same layers as late Cretaceous dinosaur bones. It survived the mass extinction 66 million years ago that wiped out 3/4 of all species on the planet. It survived and went on dominating for tens of millions of years more. From the Eocene to the Miocene, Metasequoia gradually retreated. It vanished from North America first, as the climate grew drier and more seasonal, then from Europe. Then it narrowed down to East Asia. Each cooling period cut off another piece of its range. This took tens of millions of years, so slow that no single moment looked like a catastrophe. Just, each time, slightly fewer trees, a bit further south. By the Pliocene, what had once been an endless belt of forest had shrunk to a single valley in Hubei province. Japanese paleobotanist Miki documented this in 1941. The genus had existed, and the genus was extinct. On July 21, 1943, forester Wang Zhan of the National Forestry Bureau in Chongqing arrived in that same valley. He wasn't looking for anything unusual. His assignment was a routine forestry inspection near the border between Sichuan and Hubei. But a tree next to a clay shrine stopped him. A deciduous conifer unlike anything he knew. Wang Zhan cut some branches and gathered cones. Locals showed him several more such trees in the valley. They called them shui shan, water fir. To them, it wasn't just a tree, it was a living omen. Plenty of cones in autumn meant a good harvest. A withering branch meant someone in the village would die. A small altar stood by the largest tree. People left food there and drank tea brewed from its bark, believing it had healing properties. Wang Zhan didn't have identification guides for deciduous conifers with him. He recorded the dimensions: trunk more than a meter across at the base. Height hard to judge since the tree grew on a slope. He noted the bark peeled off in long strips and that the tree had already dropped its leaves in midwinter. Locals said it had stood there for as long as the oldest villager could remember, and that there were more such trees in the valley. Getting the samples from the mountain village to Nanjing was no small task. In 1944, with Japanese occupation, roads controlled by checkpoints, and trains running irregularly. An instructor at a local agricultural school acted as intermediary, passing the material through a network of personal contacts, hand to hand, until it reached botanists in Nanjing. From there, it went further, to an experienced colleague in Beijing, who compared it to the description of the extinct genus Metasequoia and realized that a tree science had considered gone for 5 million years was still growing in a Chinese valley next to a village shrine. On May 15, 1948, the species received its official scientific name, Metasequoia glyptostroboides. While Cheney was preparing to travel from Berkeley and Boston, another American was already acting. Elmer Merrill, director of Harvard's Botanical Garden, had received seeds from that same Chinese valley and had no intention of flying anywhere. Remember that name. By the end of 1947, 2 Americans had independently obtained seeds from the Chinese Valley. Elmer Merrill, director of Harvard's Arnold Arboretum, received his by mail in January 1948 and immediately began packaging them for distribution worldwide. His logic was simple. The more institutions that received seed, the lower the risk the species would disappear. Ralph Cheney, a Berkeley paleobotanist who had spent his entire scientific career studying the genus's fossils, received seed on January 9, 1948. He decided something entirely different. He had to see the tree himself. Within less than 2 months, he was flying across the Pacific. With him went a science correspondent from the San Francisco Chronicle. Funding came from the Save the Redwoods League and the newspaper itself. It was a hurried, barely organized expedition into a country sliding into civil war. Communist forces were already near Sichuan, and everyone understood this was the last chance for any American to get there for years to come. Their gear reflected that urgency. From Wangxian on the Yangtze, they headed into the mountains with medicine, chemicals for preserving specimens, and a case of bourbon. They hired armed guards and local porters. Cheney suffered a heart attack that was misdiagnosed as bronchitis and battled dysentery and had to be carried in a sedan chair. The journalist walked. 3 days along steep, slippery mountain trails brought them to Modao, the same village with the tree by the shrine. Then 2 more days to the valley where thousands of such trees grew. It was March, and they had already dropped their leaves, standing bare. Ribbed trunks, thousands of trees filling the ravines of the valley alongside oaks, elms, beech, and chestnut, with an understory of rhododendron and bamboo. Cheney took photograph after photograph. He recorded climate, topography, neighboring species. What he had spent decades searching for in stone stood before him alive. He called the moment a botanical alumni reunion. Because of time pressure and his health, they stayed in the valley only 1 night, but managed a quick survey, more than 1,000 trees in the surrounding hills. Cheney noted this too. The trees did not grow as a monoculture. They stood together with oaks, elms, beech, amid an understory of rhododendron and bamboo. This was not a relict island. It was a fragment of an entire forest community that had existed across the northern hemisphere millions of years earlier. He recognized these associations from the fossil record. Here they were alive. On the way back, Cheney collected seed and dug up 4 young saplings. At customs in Honolulu, an inspector demanded they be destroyed under quarantine rules. Cheney protested that these trees were priceless, over 1 million years old in lineage. That did not work. The saplings were confiscated and burned. He had, however, hidden seed in an inner pocket beforehand and kept that. But the main seed shipment had already been traveling a different route entirely, without any customs drama. Now back to Merrill. Back in the summer of 1947, 6 months before Cheney even boarded his flight, an assistant to a Nanjing botanist had collected seed from the valley's trees, roughly 2 kilograms from various trees. In December, it set off for Harvard and botanical institutions worldwide. Merrill, director of Harvard's Botanical Garden, who had already sent $250 to help fund the collection back in July, received it in January 1948 and within a few weeks had mailed out at least 600 packets across 6 continents. Less than a month passed between the Chinese Valley and Boston. When the journalist who had traveled with Cheney published his series of dispatches from China, they turned the paleobotanist into a celebrity and effectively credited him with collecting seed he had not collected. Merrill read this in Boston and was furious. He had funded and organized the entire operation long before Cheney ever boarded a plane. The dispute between them lasted for years. Cheney remained, in the press, the discoverer. Merrill, the man who had actually saved the species, stayed in the shadows. Merrill sent out seed even before the species had an official scientific name, without waiting for the scientific community to finish its discussions. Packets went to botanical gardens, universities, private arboretums, to Kew in London, to Edinburgh, to Berlin, to Tokyo. Merrill understood one thing. If China closed off, and it was closing off, this seed would be all that remained of the species outside a single Chinese valley. The first trees sprouted as early as spring 1948. They grew fast. Metasequoia is one of the fastest growing conifers in temperate climates, gaining up to 1 meter a year at a young age. By the end of 1948, trees from that seed were growing in dozens of countries. Scientific papers on the new species followed one after another. The name Dawn Redwood, coined by Cheney, spread through newspapers faster than the official Latin name did. Within a few years, it became clear the species tolerated a far wider range of temperatures than expected, from the humid southern US to Britain and Scandinavia. This surprised everyone. A tree assumed to be a narrow relict turned out to be remarkably adaptable. In 1949, China closed its borders. No Western botanist could reach the valley again for 31 years. But by then, the seed was already everywhere, for the first time in 5 or 6 million years. 2 kilograms of seed from one Chinese valley turned into hundreds of millions of trees in parks around the world, while only 5,371 trees remained in the wild, barely reproducing. How that happened is a separate story. Merrill did everything right by 1948 standards. 600 packets, 6 continents, a species saved from oblivion. But all that seed came from one valley, from a few dozen trees, from a single genetic snapshot that would define the future of the entire cultivated population. Back in the valley itself, a different story was unfolding. What happened there during those years is largely unknown. When a Sino-American expedition finally reached it in 1980, they found trees that looked healthy, but no young ones. During the decades of closure, locals had converted the floodplain into rice paddies, cut the understory for firewood, and planted vegetable crops beneath the canopy. No one had prohibited this. No formal protection existed. The first protected area status appeared only in the 1980s, and without real on-the-ground enforcement, it remained largely symbolic. From 1974 onward, the Forestry Bureau kept a permanent staff of 5 in the valley, tasked with measuring every tree every 4 years. Not saving them, measuring and recording them. In the 1980s, researchers at Rutgers University ran allozyme analysis on trees grown from the 1948 seed. It turned out they traced back genetically to just 3 parent trees at the Arnold Arboretum. 3 trees from one valley had given rise to millions. In 1989, inbreeding depression was documented in the second generation of cultivated trees, reduced genetic variability leading to vulnerability to disease and reproductive failure. Inbreeding depression in tree species is a slow process. The first generation looks fine. The second already shows reduced seed viability. The third and fourth accumulate recessive mutations that natural selection would have weeded out in a large, diverse population. The trees in parks look healthy, but they are increasingly poor at reproducing themselves. A response came in 1990. A consortium of American institutions, Rutgers, the Dawes Arboretum, and others, brought in seed from 52 parent trees across 3 provinces, Hubei, Hunan, and Sichuan. A 1991 allozyme analysis confirmed the new trees carried significantly more genetic variation than those from the 1948 seed. For the first time, the genetic base of the cultivated Western population had genuinely broadened, but this was only a beginning. Even the expanded 1990 collection covered only part of the wild population's natural diversity. Some of the oldest trees near village shrines were never included in any seed bank. From 1983 to 2003, the 5 staff in the Shaohe Valley documented the deaths of 386 original parent trees. Trees aged and fell. No new ones appeared. After 2003, the death rate slowed, but only because the weakest trees had already fallen. A 2007 to 2009 census counted 5,371 trees and showed that over 60 years between the 2 counts, the total number had not changed much. But the age structure told a different story. Nearly all the trees were old, with an average age around 95 years. There were no young ones. That meant the population was not renewing itself, it was simply persisting. Every tree that fell reduced the count permanently. Without active intervention, the math was simple. The population would keep shrinking until it disappeared. Alongside this, science documented another problem. Studies showed that seed mass and germination rates in cultivated trees were significantly lower than in the wild ancestors from Lichuan. The species had been propagated into hundreds of millions, while its genetic future had simultaneously narrowed. 3 measures are now proposed. First, strengthen protected status in the Shaohe Valley and physically fence off the area around the parent trees. Second, build a proper gene bank preserving each original tree individually, rather than pooling seed together. Third, study the conditions needed for natural regeneration and recreate them artificially. Moisture, shade, litter composition. The first 2 have been discussed in scientific papers since 2006. Neither has been fully implemented. The problem isn't purely technical. After 70 years of protecting Metasequoia, It turned out that protecting an individual tree and protecting a species are not the same thing. China did the first part flawlessly. The trees stand, they're counted, they're cared for. But the species needs something else. Space where seed can fall onto undisturbed forest floor and germinate without competition. Almost none of that space is left in the Shaohe Valley, and no law protecting an individual tree will change that. Today, a small protected area operates in the Shaohe Valley. The trees are formally protected and felling is banned. It's also a tourist attraction. Thousands of visitors every year. Souvenir shops sell packets of Metasequoia seed. Some of it has been illegally collected from wild trees. Under the canopies of the parent trees, locals grow corn and vegetables, the roots competing for water and nutrients. The understory is trampled. That understory is exactly where seed should be germinating and young trees appearing. There are none. The tree by the shrine in Mudao, the same one that stopped an unnamed botanist in 1941 and Wang Zhan in 1943, still stands amid all this. There are no young trees around it. Its age is unknown. No one has ever taken a core sample to count its rings. It may carry a genotype found in no collection anywhere. If it dies, it will be noted in a Forestry Bureau report. The number will drop by 1. Nothing else will change, not in the parks of Chicago, not in the gardens of Tokyo, not along the avenues of Pizhou. The genetic work continues. After American institutions brought in seed from 52 parent trees across 3 provinces in 1990, researchers began mapping the genotypes of the original valley trees, trying to determine which carried unique genetic material absent from any cultivated collection. There turned out to be more such trees than expected, and some of them are aging with nothing to replace them. Natural regeneration hasn't recovered. There are still almost no young trees in the valley. Scientists propose recreating the conditions that existed before 1948: moisture, shade, litter composition. Early experiments with forced seed germination under the parent tree's canopies are showing results, but the distance between lab germination and a self-sustaining forest is one no one knows how to close quickly. Metasequoia begins producing its own seed at around 17 years old. For a sapling to grow into a tree capable of reproducing itself takes at least 2 decades under favorable conditions and longer under unfavorable ones. Conditions in the Shaohe Valley are unfavorable. A trampled understory, competition from crops planted beneath the canopy, and seed collected by locals before it has a chance to fall and germinate. Even if the entire valley were fenced off and cleared of people tomorrow, the first generation of a self-renewed forest wouldn't appear for another 20 to 30 years at the earliest. And that's the optimistic scenario. Metasequoia survived the end of the Cretaceous. It survived the Ice Ages. It survived retreating from the Arctic down to a single Chinese valley over millions of years. It didn't disappear because it was weak. It disappeared from the record because no one was looking anymore. Now people are looking. The question is whether that's enough, and whether it's too late for the valley where it all began.